And I welcome everyone to Press TV's news review program where we get in depth in one of the day's top stories. The British Prime Minister says that his government cannot provide enough financial support to ease the pain of the current cost of living in the country for months ahead.
Because I accept that those contributions from the taxpayer, because that's what it is, taxpayers' money, isn't going to be enough immediately to help cover everybody's costs. Of course, that isn't going to work in
so you
enough
acknowledge
in the short
you're
term.
not doing everything you can.
There is more that we can do.
Yes.
But the crucial thing is to make sure we deal with the prices over the medium and long term. Although you're quite right to point out that there is an inflationary risk and it's very severe, it could get worse. And that knocks onto interest rates, and that knocks onto the cost of borrowing for everybody. And I'm sorry to say this, but we have to be prudent in our approach. We're not saying that we're doing this in order to drive some...
Johnson rejected the prospect of raising welfare benefits in line with inflation. He argued that such a measure can easily drive inflation even higher. The Prime Minister also rebuffed the idea of windfall tax on oil and gas giants, saying move will discourage energy companies from making investments. Now, Britain is grappling with soaring inflation, which hit a 30-year high of 7.5% this March. That, coupled with the war in Ukraine, is taking a toll on the British economy. Surging prices are contributing to the biggest squeeze on household incomes since at least the 1950s. Retail sales and consumer confidence have fallen significantly in recent months. And now joining us for the program is Tony Gosling, historian and journalist from Bristol, and Daniel Lazar, journalist and author, joining us out of New York. Gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you both to the program. I guess we'll start with you, Tony, out there in Bristol. Hope you're safe and doing well. Always a pleasure to check in with you, Tony. So, Tony, the situation we're seeing in the UK, it's not basically exclusive to the UK. You very well know it's kind of a worldwide issue. But when it comes to the UK, do you think it goes back to it might be a mixture of them, or a combination, I should say. But do you think what is it pertaining more to the COVID pandemic and the supply chain issues that it basically elicited, possibly the Ukraine conflict and the energy costs from that? Or is it Brexit? Or is it Johnson's administration and their handling of, the nation's economics?
Well, look, we've got is a disaster in the economy here, really, where a lot of people have been forced onto state benefit handouts, and Johnson is now saying that they are not going to rise alongside inflation, which is a total disaster because these benefits are designed to be a bare minimum subsistence level amount of money for people. So what he's effectively saying is we are going to be driving you below the poverty line so far that you will not be able to do the basic things like feed your children, for example, to be able to turn the tap on and get water out of it. All that sort of thing is not going to be possible because the benefit levels are at subsistence level, and he's saying that they won't rise in line with inflation. This is a total disaster for the quarter or so of the population who are dependent on these benefits. And the reason they're dependent, to answer your first question, you have to go back a lot further to find why. Because it was really back in the 1970s and the 80s, in the Thatcher era, where Britain basically ceded its industrial policy to Brussels, and we basically started shutting down all of our industries around the country because we thought, oh, this is great, because we can get the stuff cheaper from abroad. Well, of course, the fact is that you're not making sure that you've got a good manufacturing base, a good job base that your people can rely on for an income. So that's been the big disaster here, is that there's been a structural problem over many years. So we're in a situation now, just let me tell you, that, for example, in our city in Bristol, there are no public toilets. Very, very few, maybe one or two privately run for-profit toilets. And so you end up with basically human excrement being found on the street every morning around our city. This is, I'm afraid, where we're at now, because there's been a complete lack of public investment and a mismanagement of the economy ever since the David Cameron government came in 2010, all these things started to go because central government stopped funding local government. But look, at the same time, what we've got is these obscene amounts of money being spent on other things, such as British Petroleum, BP, it's a firm which Iran is very well versed with, because it had a history with Iran. Their profits, just the first quarter now, $6.2 billion in profits. And that is around about $25 billion annual profit margin. So what's happening is really these massive multinationals are dictating policy. They're now more powerful than our governments, and the governments are, I'm afraid, selling the people out as a result. Another thing, just today, across the Atlantic, a similar problem over there, but Biden has just announced $33 billion to help the Ukrainian army hire mercenaries, hire private military companies, buy weapons to fight Russia for them. And so the money is going in all the wrong places, and the people are basically being sold out and forgotten by our governments. It's not surprising, is it, that the people like Boris Johnson have such a low, and Biden, by the way, low approval rating. And in Britain, you'd expect the opposition Labour Party to be doing really well out of this. But unfortunately, they have been supporting most of these policies by Boris Johnson, his COVID policies. Also, I've been saying he should have gone much further to destroy the economy. And also with Ukraine, that he should be sending more money to Ukraine. So we don't have an effective opposition either. So I think really what we're looking at is, a kind of disastrous. It's a fascistic system we've got now, where these big corporations have got far more clout than any of the ordinary people.
Thank you, Tony. And Daniel Lazar, I'd like to welcome you to the program. Now, Daniel, your initial thoughts on these challenges facing the British government today, and specifically Boris Johnson's administration.
Well, I think it's a scandal. I mean, Johnson. There are plenty of sources of revenue. I mean, Johnson could tax oil, tax fossil fuels, which would benefit the climate change, and would also probably drive down the price of oil. He could eliminate tax cheating. After all, his own finance minister, Rishi Sunak, Sunak's wife was found to be dodging something like 30 million pounds in annual taxes by hiding her income, essentially claiming an offshore domicile. So it's there are plenty of sources of income, but Johnson chooses to save money by cutting it out of welfare for the poor, and it's a scandal. It shows that where his sympathies lie, which are with the upper classes, and it shows how the working class and the poor are being neglected, are getting the shaft, and are essentially, being cheated out of their benefits.
All right, if you guys are just hold on for a second, let's check in some social media reactions on the story. Now, Anthony Weber says Johnson announces over £300 million more military aid for a proxy war which has no democratic mandate. This is condemning Ukraine to more unnecessary death and destruction, and the British public to more rises in the cost of living. What a reckless Prime Minister. Saad Gurai said the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson said that the government could not help everyone through the current cost of living crisis and had to remain prudent with its spending to avoid stoking an inflationary spiral. Surging prices are contributing to the biggest squeeze on household incomes since the 1950s. Potential Saint says sadly to know the Tories failed the British people, and most especially the disabled elderly, people who are in care homes. This Prime Minister doesn't know how to balance problems. All he cares about is the people of Ukraine, while people here are dying and living in poverty and poor cost of living. Labor can do it. Now, Logan says, no, Boris Johnson, what you are doing is sending millions to Ukraine while every citizen in Britain is potentially struggling with an increased cost of living. British taxpayer money should be spent on the British taxpayer. Charity starts at home. All right, Tony, is it fair to blame, to put the British policy with respect to what's taking place in Ukraine, to blame that as part of the problem that the money could be better spent at home?
Well, I think, we're quite used, aren't we, to being told you can't have enough money to keep open the public toilets. And yet, they're going to spend another 100, 200, whatever it is, £1 million of our money on backing, effectively, in fact, many of the people fighting in Ukraine are Nazis. I'm not talking about neo-Nazis. I'm talking about actual Nazi battalions, like the Azov battalion that have been fighting there. We want to send the money that way. Well, I don't think the British people want to do that. The real problem is that the reason that people don't have enough disposable income anymore is because of the fuel price rises recently, and also, of course, rent rises. People often forget this, that rents in Britain are astronomically high, so that before you've even managed to go and win a sue, make a tiny few pennies, you've still got the, whatever it is, £800 a month rent to pay on a building which, say, if you owned it yourself, or if you built it yourself, and then you paid it back over 50 years, would be a fraction of that amount. So there's a rentier economy with people with money investing it in property, going off and playing golf, while the rest of the population struggle to desperately pay that rent. So it's in a complete mess, the British economy, because what they've done is they've invested everything in these basic things like landlordry and rent, rather than actually making anything. Very important also to remind people that we have a lot of working poor, something like 5 or 6 million of the working poor in Britain, which is, what's that? Something like nearly 10% of the population, who are working but reliant on food banks. So they have to go and beg food every week because they can't afford to buy food. And I mean, this is the one thing the churches have done a fantastic job around Britain, and other related groups, in making sure that food is there for people, but they cannot afford to buy it, many of them. And this is people on the gig economy and what we call the working poor. So basically having a job is no longer possible to actually get you enough income to live. That's the crazy situation. In fact, it's the disastrous situation that we've come to. Also, another thing I'd just like to share with you is this whole idea of the Great Reset. I've been looking very closely at this. Klaus Schwab, Prince Charles, singing and shouting this from the rooftops. But it looks to me like a kind of suicide pact. The idea really is that people's disposable incomes are going to go down to zero and below that, and yet somehow they're still going to be happy. It almost looks as if the lords of chaos have taken over the West. Actually, they're trying to wreck the economy. And who is that going to benefit? Well, the only person or only people around the world I can see are people like the Chinese and the Russians, the red dusk of the West, that as capitalism collapses because of greed by the powerful in the West and the unaccountable, and the golden dawn of the East is coming. That is to say, China, because China will be able to tough this out. And by the way, the Chinese are also ready for a nuclear war, if necessary, which we are not in the West. So, they have bunkers in their apartment blocks. They have bunkers in their shopping centres. The West is really, I think, being led over the cliff by its present leaders, and I think we're going to be seeing more of this in the. And by the way, Boris is just completely wrong, I think deliberately wrong, about inflation. He says, we can't put these basic benefits up for the poorest of the poor because it might cause inflation. What a load of nonsense. What's caused inflation is the fuel price rises, because everyone knows in economics that if you increase the price of fuel, whether it's gas, most importantly, of course, diesel and petrol, then everything goes up in price, because diesel is used to move everything around the country. And so he's just basically got his fundamental economics completely upside down. These people are not competent to run the country. You can almost drag a tramp off the streets of the Strand in London and put them in charge, and they would do a better job, because I'm afraid the people in charge now do not have the best interests of the British people. In fact, I think you could say the same about much of Europe and the United States at heart.
Thank you, Tony. And Daniel, that's the thing. That's an age-old argument, isn't it? Even Republicans feel like that in your neck of the woods. Across the pond, they feel, increasing welfare also drives up inflation. And now we have a lot of British lawmakers that feel the same way. Is that a cop-out, or is that the case in your point of view? And if not, even if it is the case, or not the case, perhaps, is there a more equitable way to produce jobs, getting the poor into better jobs, more sustainable jobs, and getting the working class to improve their living standards?
Of course. I mean, first of all, the what's caused inflation is that the central banks have been shoveling cash onto Wall Street or the City of London to keep speculation going, and financial speculation has hit absurd heights over the last 12 years. And real estate values have been pushed up, which has pushed up rents, and now inflation is spreading from financial assets to ordinary commodities. So that's what we're seeing. The war in the Ukraine is central. The U.S., Britain, other countries are essentially allocating billions of dollars to supply arms to the neo-Nazi brigades of the Azov Battalion and other such forces. This issue has been ignored. The press is burying it. The governments don't want us talking about it. But the more the war drives up inflation and causes real hardship in the broader population, the more explosive this issue will become. I mean, essentially, why is the UK and the US providing military aid to neo-Nazis in the Ukraine? I mean, the Battle of Britain was just 80 years ago. And that's when you had Nazi planes dropping bombs on London and other cities. Now the British government is helping neo-Nazis get back into power in the Ukraine. That is outrageous. It is causing hardship among British workers, and it has to stop, and I'm quite confident that it will stop.
All right, gentlemen, always a pleasure to check in with you both. Stay safe, and thank you. Tony Gosling there joining us from Bristol, and Daniel Lazar joining us out of New York. And viewers, that's a wrap for the segment of your Press TV News Review program. Thank you for joining us, and bye-bye for now.